Hello, and welcome to another episode of the DevLab podcast. Today, we're joined by Jen Openshaw, a software engineer at BAE Systems Digital Intelligence. Jen's journey is one of transformation. She went from studying history and working in museums to coding and tackling complex tech challenges. We'll dive into her career shift, the challenges she's faced as a woman in tech, and how AI is shaping her work, and much, much more. So, Jen, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Fantastic. So look, let's start, at the beginning, as we should. Can you tell us a bit about your career journey? How did you get into tech from a history background? It's not the kind of traditional journey into technology, I suppose.
Yeah, you're not kidding there. If someone had told me back, 10 years ago when I was studying history that I would be a coder and I'd be a software engineer, I'd not have believed them for a second. But yeah, here we are. So yeah, I did history at university. Absolutely loved it. Came out and went into a job. With the National Trust. So looking after historic buildings. My role was down at Thomas Hardy's cottage down in Dorset, which is a lovely little thatched cottage where Thomas Hardy was born and grew up. And so, my days were filled with welcoming visitors, looking after the place. There was a bit of conservation. Yeah, so typical, well, I'd say typical, but, a job that lends itself to having a history background. So I did that for about 10 years and then had my little boy, Teddy. And while I was on maternity leave with Teddy, we moved 200 odd miles from the south to the northwest. I live in Lancashire. And I kind of got to this point where I was ready to go back to work, but my old career path was sort of closed to me at that point. We'd moved a long way away. And I thought, crikey, I'm in my mid-30s. I don't have the same job options open to me now. I've got a young kid. What on earth am I going to do? Where I wanted to go back to work, but I was like, where do you start? What do you do? And I went for dinner with some friends, and one of them works for American Express. She's something incredibly senior in HR. And she said, you like spreadsheets, Jen. You should try a coding bootcamp. And I was like, oh, oh, what now? Coding bootcamp just brought images of, fitness, military fitness to me. I was thinking, I was going to some park and jumping around doing star jumps or whatever. But she said, no, they're a way for non-technical people to retrain in coding. And I thought, okay, well, I do like spreadsheets. And, the idea of doing a technical job or doing a technical course was something that, once or twice had popped into my brain over the last few years. But I'd always just assumed it was too late. You needed a software engineering degree, you needed a computer science degree, and it was something that the kids were doing these days. And it was something that, just wasn't open to me. So didn't give it any more thought. But when my friend said this, it really struck something in my brain. And the next morning I went home and I started Googling. And when something just clicks and you just think, oh, yeah, I could do this. And so I dived in at that point. I did free courses on, Free Code Camp, Code Academy, just sort of intro to, I think it was probably JavaScript at the time, introduction to coding courses. And I was hooked. I just thought, this is something I've wished I'd discovered when I was 16, for various reasons didn't. We'll touch on that a bit later, possibly. But I got stuck in, started to teach myself, and then I started looking at actual coding bootcamp options. So, more of the formal course where you are taught by instructors, you turn up to classes. And so I found a coding bootcamp that would work for me. So this was just pre-COVID. So it was 2020 when I was doing this, back into 2019. And I found a coding school that was based in Manchester, so not too far away from me. And it was designed to be done part-time. So it was designed to fit around full-time jobs. And at the time, I had a full-time job, which was looking after my son, and I'd had a second kid by then. So my full-time job was full-time and then some. So this course worked perfectly for me. It was going to be able to be done while the kids were in bed. I could lean on family for childcare if I needed to do extra study, but it was going to work well. So I didn't look back really after that point. I signed up to the course. It ended up being remote because of COVID, but that actually wasn't a problem. That was fine. And so I did that course for 6 months, and off the back of that, got a job at BAE as a software engineer. And that was 4 years ago, and haven't looked back since. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's how I came to be where I am.
Fantastic. No, really, really well summarized. And I think, look, probably is, a real inspiration to anyone out there listening. I'm sure there are other people in your situation, whether it's, exactly similar, perhaps people on maternity right now that are listening in, or just others that are maybe at a bit of a loose end and looking for something a bit different. How did you find the transition? Did you feel you'd, I suppose, been prepared by your prior career with some transferable skills, some things that kind of paved the way and made things a little bit easier? Or do you feel like you were learning everything from scratch?
It's a really good question, actually. And I think there's two halves to that. Absolutely, there are transferable skills. Just from my previous workplace, the basic skills of communicating with people, knowing what the world of work is like, what it's like to be in an office environment or any kind of work environment, being used to using, just basic things like using emails and SharePoints and, all that kind of, jazz that you take with you into whatever job you go into. So all of that, yeah, fantastic. Transferable skills that I could just pick up, dust off because it'd been a year or two on mat leave, and then put straight back into use. On the other hand, the technical coding skills, completely different. I'm starting absolutely from scratch at that point. And hats off, I think, to the free courses that are out there and the instructors who teach bootcamp courses, because they do get you from this point of zero, not knowing a single line of code, not knowing anything about it. I didn't know what a software engineer was or a software developer was. I had to Google it, that first morning after the dinner with my friends. There you are starting from not even a low bar, you're starting from nothing. Yeah. And it's just a case of, working through it step by step, building the basics, building those foundations, and playing with it, really. I mean, I find coding can be really creative. I think that's another element of my personality that lends itself to coding, is that you are making something, albeit not something tangible and in the real world, but you're making something on a screen. You write a bunch of code, you click go, and a website appears. That's making something, that's creating something. And so if the more that you do that while you're learning to code, I think the more you learn, the more you pick up, and it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like you're just playing around and doing something fun, and you happen to be learning a new skill and a new career at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that, as you say, you're solving problems every day, and being able to track your own progress and see your improvements, I think, is a real motivating factor, right? It's like, I don't know, running or something like that, right? You can do 5K one day, you push it, you can do 6 the next. It's like when you're building things, and then the next time you build something, you're a little bit quicker, or you've already come across that problem, and so you can already build that test case ahead of time, or whatever else it might be. That I suppose is a real motivating factor when you're really starting out.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah, I mean, heaven forbid I should look at some of the first code I wrote, because I'd probably be horrified. But but yeah, you're just learning all the time. It's one of the best bits about it, I think.
Fantastic, excellent. So look, let's come on to your current role now. So obviously, as you kind of mentioned there, you went on that journey, got yourself up to a level, and then you moved into your role at BAE. So what's that journey been like? Like, where did you start within BAE Systems, and has that role evolved over time as well?
Yeah, I started as a entry-level software engineer, sort of same sort of level as a graduate coming in, I guess. I started off on very, I want to say, sort of straightforward, very entry-level tasks. So I was very often pair programming, where you sit with another software engineer and work through things together, usually with a more experienced team member who was able to hold my hand through those first few months and help me to come up to speed. One of the big challenges when I first joined was that my coding bootcamp had taught me to code in JavaScript, one of the main programming languages and a good entry-level one. But my first project was in Java. So I immediately thought, great, I've got all these skills, and was told, okay, great, now learn another language. So anyway, it was, after being daunted for a good few days, I actually came to realize that once you know one coding language, a lot of the fundamentals are the same. And it's just a case of, it's like learning French and Italian. The grammar might be very, very, very similar. It's just that the words you use are different. So it's, it's the same sort of thing. So yeah, so I and then since then have moved up through the levels. So I'm now shadowing to be a tech lead, so the leader of a team. So I've not only been able to build my technical skills over the last 4 years, kind of to get to that point where I'm able to do that more complicated work. I think what's really helped me is having the transferable skills that you mentioned earlier from previous careers, experience of management, experience of, all sorts of stuff, has allowed me to be able to look to that technical leadership role and bring those two halves of me together, if you like, the softer skills and the technical skills. So yeah, it's been a great company for allowing me to progress quickly through those levels, kind of with the support that I needed at the same time. So yeah, I feel very grateful for that. It's gone better than I thought it would when I first joined 4 years ago.
Fantastic. And is that kind of an official scheme that BAE Systems run within the business? Is that something that you can, anyone in the business can kind of speak to their manager and say, look, this is what I'm aiming for, this is where I want to get to, and the business will kind of help you on that journey?
Yeah, it's the latter, really. Yeah, it's kind of baked into day-to-day work. Everyone is given a manager who is there to help you, steer your career. And,
Yep.
it's absolutely good for you to say, manager, I want to get to this, I want to get to this level. This is what I'm aspiring to. And then the support is there to do it. A lot of the training is on the job, so you will learn as you go, which suits me really well. There are also other training opportunities. You can do online courses, you can do in-person courses as well. But yeah, I find it's mainly on the job, support from your team around you. There's that kind of culture where, as a more experienced engineer or as a more senior engineer, you help others who are coming up through the ranks. You pair program with them, like I mentioned earlier. I cannot remember the number of times during a day I say there's no such thing as a stupid question. I ask stupid questions all the time, and I'm encouraging people to ask them of me and of the more experienced members of the team as well. I think that's, it's kind of baked in, which I like about the organization.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Look, moving on to something that we touched on in the introduction. So obviously, as a woman in a male-dominated field, and perhaps particularly someone who hasn't come through that traditional software engineering route as well, maybe another factor. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome? And how was it that you kind of overcame that?
Oh yeah, all the time. I wish I didn't, but yeah, it's definitely a thing. I listened to a really inspiring talk a couple of years ago from the CEO, I think she was the CEO, anyway, the head of the government's NCSC, National Cyber Security Centre. And she described being a woman in a technical environment as having to put a suit of armor on every time you go into a meeting. And it really struck me. And what she was referring to is the fact that so often you're the only woman in the room. And it still happens. It doesn't happen as much now as when I first joined 4 years ago, but it does still happen. And way more than my previous career. It's not something I'd experienced ever in my previous world. And so you do just find, I think, that when you walk into a room, and I imagine it's the same for anyone who doesn't see themselves represented in that room, you're just immediately on a little bit of a back foot. You're immediately, like she said, putting your suit of armor on and just thinking, okay, I'm here, I've got this. But it's not quite as straightforward as if you're walking into a room where you're well represented. And so I think it does inevitably lead to imposter syndrome. I think there's something around the fact that, if you look around, you want to see role models who are like you, who look like you, who sound like you, who are similar to you. You want to see them in those positions that you aspire to be in. And if you can't, it's immediately difficult, I think, to picture yourself in that scenario. It's just human nature. And so I think imposter syndrome is tied in with that, really. Very often I will think to myself, crikey, am I going to be found out as not being good enough at this job? Or, what if my coding's not up to scratch? And I work with some incredible engineers who are so good technically, and it's intimidating, isn't it, sitting next to somebody or chatting to somebody who is clearly an absolute whiz at their game. And you do have to remind yourself, I am good at this too, and it goes against every bone in your body. I think this the research says that women don't want to do that as much as perhaps men do, and everything is generalized, isn't it? But I know for me, it's a big deal for me to say I'm good at my job. It makes me feel like I'm boasting, which kind of goes against my natural instincts. You can see I'm getting nervous talking about it now, but I think it's important that we talk about it. It's a real thing. It affects an awful lot of people, and me included. And I think it's something that we continue to talk about, and we continue to reassure people that it's not, not necessary, which is easier said than done, not necessary to feel that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one thing you've touched on already as well is drawing on that past experience, right? Okay, maybe you haven't coded as long as this person, but have they managed projects in different forms as long as you, or have they, brought different groups together and led teams and all of these different things that you do bring to the table, right? And I think it's trying to remind yourself that, actually there will be things that you've done more of than them, or where you're actually further ahead than they are. And actually it's all about having that mix of different competencies that is what makes a great team, right? And having those different skills within a team are what really allow a team to go on and build some incredible software or delivering on a project. I mean, how does BAE actually support women like yourself in this in this environment? Are there particular initiatives that you've been involved in that can help other women come through and maybe help them deal with that imposter syndrome in future?
Yeah. So right from the outset, I was really pleased to see that BAE puts a lot of emphasis on increasing gender diversity in the company. So, in fact, just before I started my job, I got an email from my now manager. So I'd not met this guy before, and he said, Jen, we've got an ask of you. Next week, during your first week, we wondered if you would deliver a workshop in a school to some school children. And I was like, okay, this is, feels like quite a lot, but I'm willing to give it a go. And anyway, I joined on the Monday, and I hadn't been given that much information, so I was sort of panicking a bit. I was like, oh, am I writing this workshop? Am I delivering one that someone's already done? Anyway, it became clear when I joined that me and this wonderful woman called Lauren were delivering a workshop to some Year 9 schoolgirls about coding, and it was part of a Women in Tech initiative that my office were doing. And it turned out that me and Lauren were, I think, the only two. There might have been 3 women in the Manchester office at the time. So that's why Lauren was signed up. That's why I was signed up, despite having only been with the company for less than a week. This was there. So on the one hand, I was thrilled that the company had this initiative going. They were partnering with this wonderful organization called Manchester Digital, who were arranging this this workshop, but also horrified that I was one of only 2 or 3 women. And it was that desperate that they were having to rope me in before I'd even started with the company to deliver this workshop. So anyway, fast forward 4 years, and I'm thrilled to say it's transformed. It's completely different now. So there are dozens and dozens of women now in the office. I co-founded with a couple of fantastic colleagues the Manchester Women's Network in the organization. So we get together regularly. We are building a supportive community for people who identify as female to be part of a community where they can discuss things, they can have a safe space to chat, they can build friendships, they can build professional relationships. We put on talks, host events. We're having a brunch in a couple of weeks' time where we're going to do some speed networking, which puts the fear of God into me, that networking word, but but we've done it before. It's worked really well, and it just gives people, once you get past the cringe, it gives people a chance to get to know each other. So through initiatives like that, the wider organization is very big on being part of and sponsoring other initiatives, women in tech conferences, those sort of wider events that are not hosted by us, but we love to be part of. So yeah, it will always be a work in progress, Phil, but it's coming along really well, and I'm proud of kind of what we're doing and what we're achieving.
For sure. And I think it's just incredible to see the tangible results, because I think, you hear talk of kind of diversity initiatives all the time. Every company has a page on their site diverted to diversity. And some do it better than others. And there are instances out there where, I get the feeling it's more lip service than actual tangible actions and looking for real outcomes. So it's just really nice that you are, in the environment and can actually see that impact around you, which is, really, really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, it is good. And it makes a difference to my day-to-day working. So, I really hope that it does for the other women that we support as well. And that, we just kind of creating a place that's nice to work at. You want to come to work and you want to be part of a nice community.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will. They must walk in now with, again, still that same imposter syndrome, I'm sure that anyone out there gets, but, maybe reduced by a couple of percentage points with confidence, and see, a few more people that, as you say, kind of come from a similar background or same gender or whatever else it might be. And I suppose, again, if we go back to transferable skills, you getting thrown at the deep end, presenting to year nines, at least I'm guessing from your previous work, at Thomas Hardy's Cottage, you were familiar with, speaking to school kids of different ages and things like that. And actually, so perhaps compared to someone fresh out of university, thrown into that situation, you had all that experience to draw on and perhaps went in a little bit more confident than others would have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right, and I will continue to kind of fly the flag for boot campers, as we're called, because you do get that you've got so much experience to bring to a previous role, to a new role. Yeah,
100%. Look, fantastic. But look, I think elephant in the room, we can't do a podcast at the moment without mentioning AI. We could barely have a conversation these days without mentioning AI. So let's get into it. So look, AI is making waves in the development world. How do you think AI will shape the future of software engineering, maybe specific to BAE or can be more broadly?
Yeah, again, really good question. You're right. You can't escape, can you? Anywhere you go, AI is being talked about. Whether it's in the subject of an email that lands in my inbox, it's just it's the thing at the moment, isn't it? Yeah. So I've got kind of a few thoughts on it, really. The first thought is that we read and we hear that it's going to replace coding. It's going to replace software engineers' jobs. So, the immediate thought is, should I be worried about that? I'm an engineer. Am I going to be out of a job because of coding? So that's kind of the first thing. I mean, I don't worry about it. Yeah, maybe it'll happen one day, but it's not hopefully going to be in the next few years. I think at the moment, my experience of AI is very positive in that it provides me with a useful tool to be able to do my job. And by that, I'm talking about, large language models, LLMs, tools like ChatGPT, that sort of thing. So I find that it's not reliable for writing code. So I can't palm off my day job on a AI tool like that. I can't just say to it, I want to do this, please just write the code for me. I wish it's not that easy. It doesn't work like that.
Make a cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, here you go, team. Here's my completed work for the day. What it is good for is it's like Google searching, but way better. Yeah. And so, as you'll know, like a big part of a software engineer's job is problem solving, and you spend a lot of your time Googling. And there's no shame in that. We don't keep that secret. That is a big part of the day job. You are trying to figure out how to do something. You are using Google. You're using websites like Stack Overflow, where people post solutions to their questions, to the problems that they've had before. You're reading online documentation that might be published by a software company about how to use their tools. You're basically trying to use all the tools at your disposal to solve a problem that is on your desk that morning. AI tools just cut through a load of that time for you. You will put in this question, which is along the lines of, this is my problem. How might I debug this? How might I solve this problem? What tools are out there for me to do this? You might come to it with a question at the very start and say, I want my website to have this kind of video effect. how can I do that? What tools are there out there? And it basically has the power, doesn't it, to summarize the internet for you and come back with some solutions, So that's kind of a very basic use of AI, but is one that is something that me and my team are using daily nowadays to just make our lives easier and to produce better work at the end of the day. And, it comes with a lot of caveats. You do have to be very mindful of the fact that what it says is not always right. You have to be very aware of hallucinations, this concept that it will come back with something that seems logical, seems completely right, but actually is just made up and is just nonsense. So it needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. And in many ways, I'm glad that it wasn't around or wasn't so prevalent when I was doing that boot camp 4 years ago, because I think it would have made my life too easy. I wouldn't have learned as much. So, there are endless debates, aren't there, in the media about whether it's useful in academia or not, for students at university. And, I have opinions about that, but maybe it just makes me sound old when I say, we shouldn't use it in university, whatever, it's a tool. I'm sure it has a lot of value. So kind of in my day to day, that's where AI fits in. There are parts of the organization who are doing incredible, wonderful, mind-blowing things with AI that are not within my area of work, not within my expertise, but I kind of look with interest and awe at the presentations they do on it and the work that comes out. So that's kind of my thoughts on it so far. But I look forward to seeing how it grows in future. I think it's going to be insane what comes in the next 5-10 years, if not sooner.
Yeah, look, I'd agree with everything you said there, and I think there is a real risk that it does kind of impact people's ability to think critically. Like an analogy that I've been kind of using recently, it's like driving a manual, right? If you drive a manual, you can then go on to drive an automatic, whereas people who learn on an automatic typically can't then drive a manual. And in that particular context, that's probably not a big issue, right? If everything's automatic, it's not, it's not an issue. But ultimately, are we going to lose some of those skills, or are we going to lose some ability to think critically? Definitely is, I think, a concept that people are having to grapple with out there at the moment. But to your point around using it as a tool, using it to complement your work and supplement what you do and speed things up, absolutely. That's here to stay for sure. And I think, I've seen a few kind of bits on LinkedIn and things like that, where it's like, look, AI isn't going to take your job, but someone who uses AI will. If you're completely averse to using AI, then ultimately you're not going to be able to code at the same rate as people who are using co-pilots and things like that and are kind of working in conjunction with it. So yeah, that's very much where we are. And then who knows, 5 years, 10 years, I do think there will be a point where we probably do have to accept that there isn't enough work for humans in society, and actually we need to think about living wages, but we're not quite at that stage just yet, I don't think. It's certainly very interesting.
Yeah, you make a really good point there. In fact, this was a chat I was having with someone the other day. It does the way we teach children in schools need to adapt slightly as a result of it. We have such an emphasis on learning facts, don't we, still today? History is a prime example, isn't it? You learn you learn dates, you learn facts, and that's a big part of the role. But in a world where all of that data is just a click away, it's not valuable anymore, is it? So what are the skills actually that we as children need to learn to be able to make the most of the changing situation? And I'm sure there are some very clever people in education who are all over this, and I look forward to seeing it as my boys grow up, and they go through school. So it's going to be interesting times.
Yeah, no, definitely. Fantastic. Look, so coming back to, I guess, the career change side of things, like we always like to kind of round things off with some really nice, tangible advice for anyone out there listening in. And as I touched on earlier, could be people out there listening in that are at a very similar stage in their lives, thinking about those sorts of career changes that you were thinking about. So for anyone who is at that stage, what advice would you give them based on your experience?
My first piece of advice is do it. Just do it. I haven't looked back since, and it can be nerve-wracking. It can be a really daunting prospect. But I think as long as you are confident that it is something you will enjoy and something you want to do, then absolutely go for it. Life's too short. And I think the days when people had a career for life are, that's kind of gone, isn't it? It does not harm you in any way to change careers or move jobs or try something different. I think, I'll say it again, life's too short. Do something that you enjoy and that you want to do on a Monday morning. And in terms of more practical advice, I would say to anyone who is interested in exploring coding as a career, get online and do some free courses. There are so many out there. Pick a language. It doesn't really matter which one. JavaScript is a good one. Python is a good one to start with, but honestly, any will be fine. Have a go, get hands-on, do some courses, build some stuff, very, very basic tools. You will be amazed at the amount of resources that are out there. And if you get the bug, pun intended, if you find you enjoy it and you think, yeah, I could do this, then don't hesitate to take it further, because it's a really rewarding job. It's really fun, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for it as well.
Excellent. Yeah, really well said. But final kind of question that we have for you today is, looking ahead, what are the biggest opportunities for those entering the tech field today? And how do you think the industry will evolve over the next few years? I guess AI is probably one element that you've already touched on, but is there anything else that you would want to highlight there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, AI, definitely one of them. I think cybersecurity is a growing field. It's always been incredibly important. I think, with the current political situation, it's only going to get more important. So I think, building a really resilient cybersecurity industry in this country is only going to be a good, very important thing. And I think it is a growing sector, and it's somewhere that someone who is interested in that world and in, coding and doing tech in that world can really fly, can really find a decent opportunity and run with it. So I think that's certainly something to explore. And again, there are courses online, introduction to cybersecurity courses that are really good. There's a fantastic website called Try Hack Me, which is where I will learn the basics of cybersecurity. So that's a good one to have a go at. So yeah, and then I don't think we can underestimate the fact that the basics of technology will always be there. We will always need websites. We will always need apps on our smartphones and our devices. So I think don't write off the bread and butter of technology, if you like, which is building those platforms, those websites, those apps, those kind of essential tools that we will continue to need unless there's something coming that I really don't know about. But again, that's tech, isn't it? You think you're up to date, and then something will change, and you're suddenly out of date in 10 minutes. But no, I think on the whole, that's where I'd put my focus.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another thing that you've already touched on as well is, again, just that diversity of of people from different backgrounds moving into the world of technology, right? I think, it's not necessarily just with women in tech, but also people of different racial backgrounds, and different economic backgrounds and things like that. I think we are seeing a little bit more of a democratization and a little bit more of a breaking down of some of those barriers and perhaps long held assumptions that tech is typically for this type of person and it's not for me. And I think that's probably also something that we'll see continue to evolve over time, which is great.
Yeah, very much hope so, and I'm confident that it will.
Yeah, excellent. Look, thank you so much for joining us today, Jen, and yeah, you've been a fantastic guest, giving some really, really great advice, and been lovely to hear your story and how you kind of made that transition. Before we do wrap, is there anything at all that you haven't had the chance to share with the listeners? Anything at all you wanted to get off your chest?
No, not really. I'd just like to say thanks for having me. It's been really fun recording this podcast with you. And I will reiterate what I said earlier. If anyone is contemplating a career change into tech, just do it. Don't give it any more thought.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening in. This has been another episode of the DevLab podcast. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks all.